the idea of God and of a higher power, of a loving God, not a religious God, of some kind of loving energy or force, that things are going to be okay, that has helped me immensely navigate life, because I can rely on that to counterbalance my human fears and insecurities and worry about the future. And when you look at the size of the cosmos, it's overwhelmingly vast, and we are overwhelmingly significant. And also we know we're going to die. And that's a really hard thing, I think, for me to get my head around. It's like I'm conscious, and I'm conscious that I'm going to die.
Of all the podcast guests so far, you're the one that's required the least amount of preparation.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad it's low maintenance.
Yeah, you've reached the pinnacle, brother. Congrats.
Yeah, fabulous.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
That's right. Well, I always like to set the scene so people know like what they're actually going to listen to, even though you and I probably don't know what's going to happen. But what is it that you do, my friend? I think that's always an important thing.
Yeah, so I struggle to answer this question, to be honest with you. I can talk about my background, and that might give a bit of context. So I think probably the easiest way to describe what I do is I'm a strategist. But I'm a strategist in the sense of helping to build better businesses or create better things. Sometimes it's in a commercial context, sometimes it's a not-for-profit context. But ultimately what I do is solve problems in what I would call using modern thinking and modern techniques and modern technology, and as a foil to more traditional thinking, traditional approaches, traditional ways of solving some of these problems. So that's a very non-specific way of answering your question, but strategy is the thing. But I approach it from different angles. So I have a background as a creative director, I have a background in technology, a background in digital, background in agencies, background as an entrepreneur. So the way I approach things is perhaps a little bit different to how other people would approach them. And it seems to work.
Was that well received at school, out of curiosity?
No,
or?
I was not good at school.
Yeah.
School didn't really work for me. The age I'm at now, I dropped out of university after a couple of years. And so I never really achieved remotely close to my potential in an academic sense. I just wasn't, I didn't have the structure wasn't right for me. I needed much more sort of personal time than what I got in a group context. I'm also a very sort of naturally shy person, so being in the group context didn't quite work for me. And I wasn't really engaged enough to be present and get a lot of value out of it. I've gone back to university and started doing master's papers and things like that since I've left. And I'm a very good student now because I want to be there, I want to learn. Whereas I wasn't really ready for that as a child and as a teenager.
Yeah, I say, because the attributes you described aren't necessarily conducive to conformity.
No, they are not. Yeah. I was the kid who always got told off talking on the mat. That was my thing.
Okay. Were the kids mean to you? Or you had a few?
Oh, I think I got my share of bullying like everyone else, but it wasn't really that. It was more, I was always very curious and questioning of things. And that is, not necessarily what teachers want.
Yeah.
And I always probably thought that I knew better at some level too, which I don't and didn't. But that's just my personality. I'm curious about things. If it doesn't make sense to me, I want to figure it out.
Yeah. What do you think? Like, because the podcast listeners have heard it a lot, but I have the theory that your purpose is essentially helping a version of yourself in the world. Like, that's when you'll feel most engaged.
Interesting.
So using that as a potential filter of like either strong emotional themes you see consistently throughout your life, or certain events that cause you to think a certain way, like, say psychologists, they witnessed hardship or they experienced hardship, so now they want to solve it. Where do you think that curiosity stems from? Or like, we don't have to unpack your whole being, but that's I love that shit, so go as far as you want.
I have always been very curious about life itself, I think is probably I have always felt that there are things that I cannot see or comprehend, and I'm interested to know what those things are. And so from a young child, I guess I don't really know where my curiosity came from, but I have been given a relatively good brain, so I've always wanted to understand and learn things. Learning really gets me going. And where that came from, again, I don't know. I had a sort of strange childhood where I won't unpack it too much, but from an environment perspective, I was in cities, and then I went rural sort of all of a sudden at age 8 or 9 or something like that. And so I was kind of more of a city town kid, and then I went rural. And so I used to spend a lot of my time either my head in books or outside carrying on the fantasy of the books that I was reading in the field. And I think because a lot of my childhood I was reading a lot of books, I was very into science fantasy, science fiction. I think that kind of opens your mind, right? It gets you thinking about, funnily enough, fantasy is a really good way to understand reality.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of disconnect from it and look back at what you're seeing with another frame of reference. So perhaps that was maybe where it came from, was the kind of science fiction, science fantasy stuff I was into as a kid, because that's very imaginative and explorative, and perhaps it was also, I've always had this sense that things can be better, and somehow I have some role to play, however small or large, in whatever that might be. And that's always driven me. I've always looked at things and been like, I think we can do that better, or maybe we could do it this way, or so I guess in a sense I like experimenting with stuff too. Yeah.
Well, there's a guy, Stuart Forsyth, is a management consultant. It's like organizational psychologist would be a better description. And I asked him, how do you discover self-awareness? And he's like, novels.
Right. That's a very interesting question.
Yeah, because essentially he said that you're putting yourself in the point of view of another human being, and you're assessing how you fit within that mold. Mm-hmm. There's another thing, it is relating to what you're saying, is Tony Robbins was helping this guy that stuttered. And they found out that there's a point in his life where his mum and dad were fighting, and he was always watching this TV show where the hero would stutter under stress.
Right.
So he learned that was his defense mechanism. So I'm wondering, the fantasy is an opportunity to create a reality that was better than the one you were in?
100%. No question. Yeah,
okay.
No question. And I was very influenced by a writer named David Gemmell, who wrote heroic fantasy. So his whole philosophy was that there needs to be more heroes in the world, and he wanted to see young men have stories of heroes where they would learn some of those principles and apply them in their life. But a lot of his characters are very nuanced. They're not clearly, good heroes. They are nuanced, and he would raise a lot of interesting philosophical questions in his writing. And so that sort of stuff really interested me as well, as I was reading stuff that made me understand that life is not black and white, and there are lots of nuances with everything. And in fact, it's the million shades of grey is what life really is. And context and environment and perspective and things, your morals and things like that, how do they shift based on the pressures you're under, based on the environment you are in? How would you react in similar situations? And so, obviously, as a young child, all the heroic fantasy stuff was right up my alley. I loved it, as well as all the other things. But I think the thing I really got from it was the philosophy behind it. That was what really intrigued me. So a lot of what I do now, I think people would probably describe me that I'm relatively philosophical in my approach to things. I like thinking through things from the philosophy behind the business, the psychology, what it is we're trying to do. So some people would probably also call some of that like trying to get things back to first principles, I think is interesting. But first principles are hard to understand being a human being about ourselves, because we're these emotional, irrational creatures. So it's often very hard to understand like what is actually driving the way that I'm thinking in this situation. So coming back to your point about self-awareness, more self-awareness definitely helps with that. If you don't have self-awareness, it is not easy to navigate life, I don't think.
Well, there's a strong correlation with sleep and self-awareness with pretty much most of the mental disorders in existence.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's the most invaluable thing. The hard thing is accepting the aspects of yourself that are the hardest to accept, and being aware of them, and holding those two spaces.
Being aware and accepting are two very different things, I agree.
Yeah, well, just on the, like, I'm obsessed with why people do what they do. So I'm wondering, with that filter you talked about, the underlying symbolism or themes that you see perform well in front of the narrative that people see online, or brand, because I saw brand was part of what you do. Do you see, like the hero's journey? Have you heard of the hero's journey?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so do you see sort of underlying principles or symbolisms that seem to resonate with humans?
Well, I think humans are pattern recognition machines at some level, right? It's my brain. I'm just going to use my own experiences. Is my brain seems to want to categorize and organize things based on patterns, right? That's kind of how I think we interpret things, and our brain sort of invents half of what's going on by recalling the patterns it already knows and applying it. Yeah. So obviously, the more patterns that you have access to, the more you're able to interpret reality. But then the really interesting thing, I think, is challenging the pattern you think something is and going, is this actually right? And I think comes back to self-awareness. Is I have found that really looking at why I'm thinking certain things is quite revealing and also quite shocking, because suddenly you realize that a lot of the things you think are just self-justifications of stuff that you want, but aren't necessarily perhaps completely aligned with how you would like to be, or whatever. I think that constant inventory of oneself is very important for me, particularly, especially because I like to think of myself as someone who's quite values-driven. So if I want to be a values-driven individual, I have to constantly look at my behavior through the lens of values. And you don't get it right all the time, but I can't remember how we got to where we are.
It's all right, we'll go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I think I'm similar on the values train. I have 3 core values, and I use that as the filter of which I treat others and who I sort of connect with and who I surround myself with. And I think there's an important thing that I find about humans, is including myself, is you're not necessarily seeking the truth, you're trying to confirm what you already know.
Yeah.
And I think that underlying driver and that why is quite a powerful approach to view the world. Do you have, like, let's say you come in, you've got this big ass problem, or they've got a certain way of doing things. Is there a way to explore what could be the underlying drivers so that they can pivot to a new direction? Do you have a process, or you wing it? Yeah,
look, there's multiple ways to approach it, but in general, my process is to iterate. In general, my process is diverge, converge. So you go wide, explore stuff, converge it to something. Go wide again, explore stuff, converge it to something, which is quite classical design thinking, or whatever you want to call it. But iteration to me is the key. And it's gathering as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, and seeking the insight that information can give you. I could go very deep on the whole. We've done one of the companies that I built, co-founded, is called Meaningful Technology, and it was very much focused on the information side of information technology. And I learned a lot about information theory and various other things. So I won't go too deep, but in general, my approach is learn as much as possible, as fast as possible, and bring multiple people's perspectives together to look at that information and see what comes out of it. Because different people with different skills, background, culture, experience will find much different things in the same information set. So there's a lot of talk about diversity today. And I think there is something to be said for diversity in the sort of what you can see sense, color, gender, all of those kinds of things. But we can't see what each other is thinking. We can't see our thought space. And to me, the more important part of diversity is differences in the thought space, analyzing and interpreting information. That to me is the really interesting thing. It's very easy to get diversity from what we can see. But actually what the point of diversity is diversity of thought, to me, in this context. So that's kind of my process, is just learn as much as you possibly can as quickly as possible, and then make something. It's much easier to do things when you have something tangible and real. So, for example, if you're trying to make a strategy, it's much easier to get a version of a strategy on paper or in some way that you can look at and feedback on. I think in general, human beings are much better at giving feedback on things than they are working in the conceptual sort of thought space, right? So making things and iterating quickly is kind of how I generally go about it. And you can apply that principle to basically anything. The key is doing it with consistency and with discipline.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing in the content space. It's something I've emerged into and love now, was exactly that. You make an ungodly amount of content, you don't have no idea what works, and you find a formula and you use that and you make small iterations. And I agree with the diversity of mental mind maps. I think as leaders, and especially business owners that hit a ceiling, is because they're trying to manage the process in the way that they view it should be managed, as opposed to allowing the individual to be the individual. Because it's all speculation. It's like, what the fuck's going to happen in the future? We have no idea. So we need someone that was part of the process of the idea and has responsibility for its execution. How do you create a space for all these fucking different thinking people? Like, how do you, have a whiteboard? Do you write it down?
The first step is actually to create space.
Okay.
And that shouldn't be underestimated, just how important that is. So I'll give you an example. So in most of our jobs, we turn up to work or whatever it is, and we do the thing we do, right? We're used to operating in a specific way. If we talk in a business context, people have a role, they turn up, they do their role. To innovate or to do interesting stuff, you have to pull them out of their day-to-day. And so, like, going to a meeting in the meeting room that you always meet in at work isn't really creating space. You kind of actually want to pull people out of the BAU as much as possible. This is very difficult to do because you can pull people into a room for a few hours and they immediately go back to BAU. And it takes a few hours to even unset from your day-to-day normal mindset to even get into a position where you can think in an interesting way. Now, there's lots of techniques and things you can do to sort of get people in the right space. I do a lot of them when I'm facilitating workshops, which is quite interesting. So one I do all the time is I give people a bit of A3 paper and I say, okay, I want you to draw how to make toast. And people go, what? And I'm like, just do it. Just sit down, just take 5 minutes. I want you to draw how to make toast. Did you get no other instruction? All you have to do is create a good enough drawing of how to make toast where you can explain to someone else how to make toast. And so people go and do it, and it's really interesting. Lots of observations fall out of that. So if you have 10 people in a room, there'll be 10 different versions of how to make toast, right? The more information that you have and the more specificity you give, the more consistency you'll get in terms of results. So when I don't give a lot of information, for example, some people go as far as saying, well, wheat needs to grow from the ground and it needs to be processed. Some people start with bread. We make all of these assumptions about what we have or what we don't have. And that's really interesting. When you give more information or more specificity, you're going to get more consistency in terms of what people actually do. The less information, actually, the more interesting, because you get a much more diverse set of drawings back. Because some people actually figure out some really interesting stuff. Some people even go as far as to say, well, I made these assumptions in my representation of how to draw toast. There's generally sort of 7 to 10 elements which are pretty consistent across all of them, but they're all expressed in different ways. You learn about what people's personality type and style is like. Like analytical people sometimes don't draw anything. They literally just write steps of right, and then you get the very visual people who produce these brilliant diagrams that are almost like pieces of art that sort of deserve to be framed, and everyone's like, wow. People generally gravitate to the more visually interesting ones in review and things like that as well. And then a point that I make, because usually we're facilitating this in a business context, and I go, look, if there's 10 people in the room, I say, look, there's 10 different versions of how to make toast here. If we're trying to create a business is a much more complex thing than trying to articulate how to make toast, and yet look at how different all of our versions of how to make toast are. As a business, our job is to figure out how we make toast. What's our one version of it? How are we going to do it? And so that's one example of something that I run all the time, which is a really good exercise to get people sort of thinking in the right way. Because you want them to make observations that they go, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. Or getting people's minds open is a hard process, particularly when people are very used to doing the same things over and over and over again. So to start with, creating space is the single most important thing. If you can create space, everything else can be done. If you can't, nothing will really happen. You need to create space, and space is not just physical. Space is mental, meaning I can actually express myself in this physical space with what I actually think. Particularly when you're working in corporate structures and things like that, people are generally filtering themselves by, what's acceptable or what's not. And that's okay, but it doesn't help for getting lots of interesting, different ideas. You'll generally get a lot of the same stuff because people are operating within their sort of filter on themselves. Whereas true, interesting collaboration, innovation occurs when you don't have those barriers. There's always a certain level of that you're going to bring to the table. The more of that you can get rid of and make it okay to be yourself, be vulnerable, be authentic. You and I, we trust each other. I can speak my mind, and I know you're not going to go out and tell Sandra, our boss, what I just said about this, and be like, oh, Matt's a complete goon or whatever. That stuff's really important. But a big thing we do, a big thing we advocate is creating space and doing it with consistency. If you want to get fit, you need to create space in your schedule to go to the gym. And you don't want it to be the kind of space where you're rushed end to end, where you can't really focus. You're sitting there at the gym, but the whole time you're thinking about, I've got to be at a meeting in 5 minutes. You have to actually make space. And even better, you prioritize making space as sort of the foundation of your calendar, as opposed to something you fit into BAU. Now, that stuff's all really hard to achieve in reality, because we have to do business as usual. We have to execute our businesses. We have to execute our roles. But, if we're doing that for 80% of our time, and 20% of the time we are in a new space where we're challenging ourselves and each other to come up with interesting stuff, or, that's an interesting dynamic to create. Very hard to do in reality, but really worthwhile investing time, money, energy, effort into it for sure.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a good illustration and creates the precursor for, you make a good point about not having limitations, in the sense that, you got this conformity of how you should express yourself, and that creates opportunity for creativity. There's in terms of the internal space, I go to this thing called the Mankind Project every week, and how they start the sequence to create the space is a grounding piece. So that's to help make you present, meditation, laughter, whatever the fuck. And then the next piece is actually being aware of agreements that you've broken that are stopping you from being present.
Interesting. Or
charges or feelings you have towards others out there in the world. So that means you're not in a space where you're able to hold it for other men. So they go through that to create the internal environment, but it is the same space each time.
Yep. I think applying more spiritual practices like that in corporate environments and things would go really well. A lot of people go, oh, it's woo-woo, but it's actually not. It's very fundamental to my mind. So I love the sound of that. I think that would be a good idea, actually, for lots of businesses to start doing more of that kind of stuff.
It's the art, eh? We had a lady on the podcast not long ago. She does that for corporates, does mindfulness workshops.
Right.
And that, I think that's the hardest thing, is in essence, like I'm quite obsessive of how I think about other people and understanding them and why. And it was unhealthy because, you're projecting what they're thinking, and when they're not actually thinking that. So you got this pinging all the time. So mindfulness was a way to ground it.
Are you a conflict avoider or a conflict seeker?
I find it hard to have an elephant in the room and not address it, but I don't like conflict as such.
Right.
So I won't not talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But I think that the sad thing is seeing these people unaware of the tools or unwilling to navigate those tools and seeing them drown. You sort of see the trajectory of their life where they're running from their problems. You think about how many people are medicating their lives through substance, are medicating their lives through security, and then they die. And then you try and stir the pot in a way that will get them to think, but all you get is resistance, because it's a lot easier to vilify the world than to vilify yourself.
100%.
So what might be your spirit? On the philosophy side of things, are there principles or practices or habits you've developed as I push this button that have helped you enhance your life, your toolkit? What's your spiritual toolkit that makes you happy or just not depressed? Or maybe you are depressed, I'm making an assumption.
So my toolkit involves a bunch of different things, but some of perhaps the practical stuff is I'm a big believer of letting your conscience be your guide. So I believe that every human being has a conscience, and that generally most people know what's right and what's wrong, if we want to use those kind of binary extremes. Yeah. And so for me, it's about getting in touch with myself and my own conscience, but also holding myself accountable to my own conscience as well. Is when I have acted in a specific way, it's very hard for me to tell sometimes. Maybe hard to tell is not the right word. Sometimes it takes me a while to figure out what my part in certain situations was.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And so I have to pay particular attention in retrospect to reflect on something and go, actually, why? And often if I'm emotional about it, I have to get through the emotional layers before I can think about it rationally.
Yeah.
And so I think constantly doing that is very useful. Meditation is a really important part of the puzzle to me. I think it's a really good and useful tool, and something that I get tangible benefit from almost immediately, like creating space in my life to sit and be still and breathe and meditate. I feel much better generally immediately after I do it. And I try and meditate for about 20 minutes. That's something that's very practical that I do. Yeah.
Yeah, as a saying, I feel is the best thing I've ever learned. I think that moment of 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 1 minute, whatever ritual is like a defrag. But I think where people miss the boat on meditation is that it's all day. Right now, if I let my mind go, I would probably get really nervous because people scare the shit out of me. It doesn't matter. If I'm not in 15 years, it doesn't matter.
So you're talking about the idea of presence, right? So being present in meditation is you're kind of bringing them together, right? Yeah,
it's like when you're talking, I'm doing two things. I'm like, oh shit, there goes a thought that's bringing me away. Let's observe it. And I come back to my breath, and then I focus on you again. And I'll do that 1,000 different times over 10 minutes.
It's hard to do. It's really hard to do. You're doing a good job of it, though.
Thank you. You don't even know. I'm hiding it, bro. Because that was actually a realization lately. So I used to, just to take the podcast a different way, I used to challenge myself because talking to girls was so scary. So I'd go out there and I'd meditate until I got to a point where I was comfortable. But I realized that was a mistake because inherently I was saying my emotions that I'm feeling are not okay. So now what I do is wear the emotions and observe them. I'm just wondering, there might be quite a few people that don't meditate listening to this and it might be a bit out the gate, but are there spiritual or mindset milestones that you've reached on your journey? So you've had a realization where you've sort of unpacked something about meditation, or you started talking to Buddha in your head or something.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the main, whenever I talk to anyone about meditation, I think people's idea about meditation is that it means that you have to quiet your mind. You have to be still and there's no thoughts. That's not what meditation is like with me at all. I'm still and quiet, but I'm observing the stream of thoughts. And it's really trying to observe it, but not judge it and not latch on to any of them. Just let the stream of consciousness go and just try and observe it. And honestly, and your mind wanders constantly, right? So you're in a space of observation, and then suddenly you're thinking about what you're going to do in 7 years when this happens or that happens, and you're in this complete rabbit hole, and you go, oh, this is not where I'm meant to be. Wander back, be present. Here I am, and that happens constantly and over and over. Meditation is a struggle to stay sort of focused. Focus is really hard. And so just for me, it's just making the space to sit and breathe and try is great. If I do that consistently, I'll get results. But if I get the difference between now and when I first started is I used to be really focused on time when I first started. I've always been like, it's been 30 seconds, it's been a minute, how long's it been, how long have I got to go? Whereas now I just sit, and I'm not really worried about the time. The person who taught me how to meditate was like, don't use a timer, and you'll naturally figure out like where the time is, and I can do that, but I actually prefer to use a timer because it completely allows me to disconnect from those time thoughts. So I know that the timer goes off, so I don't have to worry about over meditating and missing this or whatever. So if I don't have any time constraint, I'll meditate without a timer. But if I do have time constraints, I'm like, I know I need to be done within 20 minutes or whatever, I'll put on a timer, and then I can forget about how long it's been or how long I've got to go, and I can just... So yeah, my head was always thinking about time when I first started. Now it doesn't, I don't think about it at all. I can get into, I guess you'd say, deeper states quicker. Meaning I can let go of all the surface bullshit that's going on a lot quicker and go slightly deeper, yeah. Not every day, but some days.
Yeah, I think with that time thing, I feel I would have to reach a certain level of reassurance before I would commit. So I was like, check is the alarm clock on? Is the sound on?
Totally.
And then you're like, okay, now I'll surrender. That's interesting. So okay, well, philosophy. I mean, we'll talk about innovation and what you do, but philosophy. So is there a question you ask of life the most that you find the most interesting, whether you have answers? Why are we here?
I'm a why guy, so why has always been my question.
Okay.
About everything, it's why. Now why is a really good question, but you have to, it can also be a too broad, too vague, too difficult question at the same time, but it's definitely why for me.
So why are we here, do you think?
Do you mean in this room as human beings? It's just the big question, why are we here?
Yeah, why are we here? The big question.
So, I don't know. I think that's okay. I generally try and be open to possibilities, right? So I'm very spiritual. I believe in a higher power, but I also love science, and I really believe in the scientific method. I think both are compatible, truly. Spirituality seems to help me navigate my own head and fears and things like that a lot more than science does.
Yeah.
Science really fascinates me and is just endlessly curious about the nature of the reality that we exist in. And I love that. Probably it's not a regret, but what I wish I had been, I wish my mind had been as captured by science when I was a child as it is now. Because my life would look a lot different, I imagine. I like my life now. It's great. I really enjoy what I do, and it's awesome. But science to me is endlessly fascinating. I would have loved to have been a physicist or a biologist or anyway. But I think for me, why I'm here is it's to have a human experience. Number one. Now, because I'm having a human experience, I need to try and optimize that experience, right? But I'm very big on, I know that the way that I behave can have a big impact on you and vice versa. So I'm a big fan of trying to optimize the experience by elevating both of our experiences. Like the more I can give, if we all gave to each other, life would be easier for everyone. So to do that, I have to change myself. I'm a selfish, self-centered, afraid human. It's just how I am, right? And I have to constantly fight against my nature and my emotions to try and be better and to try and think of others and do all that kind of... It's not easy. It doesn't come natural to me, and I wouldn't say I'm good at it. But for me, the purpose to my life is just to be better daily. Sometimes I am not better. Sometimes I'm not capable of much, but I have this kind of romantic idea, right? Like I want to be on my deathbed and look at my life and go, I lived it. I lived it. I lived it authentically. I gave my own potential the best chance to manifest that I could. And I gave myself to the pursuit of trying to help our species in our world in my own little insignificant way, but for me it's significant. That's for me the thing. Is just try and evolve, try and be better. Keyword being try, because I will always fall short in some way. But as long as I'm on the path, as long as I'm trying, that's enough. What about you?
Okay, the why. Why are we here? Well, I'm a bit more on the cold scientific side of things.
Right.
I think religion has an immense value for many people. It seems to be quite a liberating experience. It also has the opportunity to help the unhelpable. They have a reason to strive more, like criminals in prison that everyone's given up on. They have the potential to be something more because of something more. So I think it's beautiful. Why are we here? Just by circumstance is what I think. An accumulation of time. There's an interesting thing. Lex Friedman. I feel like it'd be up your alley, more introverted.
Love his content.
Yeah.
Listen to it often. Yeah.
Well, there's an evolutionary scientist. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but he was talking about there's almost 100% probability that the way we view the world is our adaptation as opposed to what the truth is.
Totally, yeah.
So then that makes, the concept of space and time and where we build the biology and the physics of life around it could be not what reality is.
100%. I'm interested to touch on your point around. I'll talk about a higher power a little bit because I think this is an interesting conversation from a scientific perspective too, right? So when I look at life, I just find some of the design to be like too perfect for it to be an accident. That I think is the single. So I think God is real, at least from the perspective that people conceptualize God in their head. So if you think what's in your head, your ideas, your thought space is real, and I mean real to me. You can't see my thoughts, right? So to you, they don't exist, but your thoughts do to you. But to me, from my conscious experience, my thoughts are real in some sense. I can think of concepts, I can hold them in my head. So God is real in the sense of it exists in a lot of people's thought space, right? To them, it's real. Is it measurably, objectively real in terms of reality, like our physical reality, which is just particles and a bunch of other stuff that I don't want a physicist to go, you're wrong about that. But, I don't know. But I have found that the idea of God and of a higher power, of a loving God, not a religious God, of some kind of loving energy or force that things are going to be okay, that has helped me immensely navigate life because I can rely on that to counterbalance my human fears and insecurities and worry about the future. And when you look at the size of the cosmos, it's overwhelmingly vast and we are overwhelmingly significant. And also we know we're going to die. And that's a really hard thing, I think, for me to get my head around. It's like I'm conscious and therefore I'm conscious that I'm going to die. And so for me, the idea of a higher power, a God or whatever, helps me live better today as a human being. I don't really care whether it's objectively real or not because it helps me. It helps me to navigate stuff. So for me, it's really important. But equally, I love science so much, and I believe in the process. Obviously, if you look at where we are as a species and with all the wonderful technology and information, everything we have access to, science has a lot. We can mostly thank science for that stuff, right? So it's amazing. The universe is just, we don't even know if there's one or multiple universes, or we know very little, right? But it's endlessly fascinating to me. But just now, not everything is perfect in terms of design. Like lots of things have very flawed design. Like human beings, you could make an argument, are really flawed the way we're designed, fundamentally, right? But there's also this kind of perfection to the synchronicity of everything, which evolution might be the answer for. But I don't think that we know or can definitively say whether there is some, a concept of a higher power or not. I very much don't believe in the concept of a religious God, but just the sort of architecture of reality to me is too genius for there not to be something behind it. But hey, if there isn't, Who cares,
Well,
right? It doesn't matter. Like, live your life, and if you optimize your life in the time that you're here, whether there is or isn't a God or whatever, it doesn't really matter, right?
Well, you're happier by the sounds of it with a God,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
your life was. I think you talked on something interesting there, and I think arguably for me, the most beautiful thing in life is death.
It's interesting.
And I say that because it's like doing an assignment with no deadline.
Right. So you think the finality gives things meaning, basically?
Yeah, it's like happiness is a contrast. So like if you're always perpetually full, you wouldn't enjoy food. So
Yep.
in essence, without death, there is no life.
Right.
So that's
I like that idea.
Yeah.
I can be on board with that.
And I think in a world like this, I think it's amazing that we think differently and we're not, cancelling each other.
Well, we also don't know. It might be that when we die, the machine just turns off and there is nothing left of us. You know, some people are like, well, you live on through your kids and, your genetics and things like that. I totally get that. But actually, none of us really know. You'd have to be dead to know.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly open to there being some other adventure after this. But again, if there is or it isn't, it doesn't really matter as long as I optimize this life that I have now, right? Because if there is some other adventure and we, or whatever, great, sign me up, awesome.
Yeah.
And if there's not, well, at least I've lived my time here as best I can, and that's all I can do. So regardless, it's about, for me, optimizing the time you have here. It has to be. And I love the idea that death gives that meaning because we know it's going to end. I think that's quite beautiful.
Yeah. And on air, when we're both dead and we're in heaven or wherever the fuck, and I'll be like, oh yeah, my bad.
Yeah, I find it amusing. Like if we die and then you find yourself in some other place, you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, you're right all along.
Yeah,
man.
this is bloody cool.
I was such an idiot. But yeah, I love the symbolism of religion.
Right.
And one of the themes I see is this concept of resurrection. And the resurrection, comes from the emergence from the dark. So it's like I walk through the shadow of death and I see no evil. So it's like I walk through the darkest aspects of who I am, the devil, the hell, the parts I can't integrate or accept. But the moment that I do, then I become closer to God and my ability to achieve the things that I want from life. Do you see do you either see patterns in people that lead them down a trajectory of unhappiness or a framework that leads them into a positive direction that stems from that fantasy that you used to read?
That stems from the fantasy I used to read.
So the escapism that you're experiencing that was a framework to navigate the rural life that you had. Did you find a certain sense of resurrection or liberation that came from learning that?
So,
like an epiphany moment in your life?
At the time, it was a necessary escape from the reality I was experiencing, I would say.
What gave you hope? So let's say, without context of what you went through, what someone that's going through something that's hard and challenging, and they don't necessarily have their hero to turn to, and you're the hero in this moment, what would you say to them as hope?
So, in my experience, everything will get better if I hang on and keep going.
Okay.
And hanging on and keeping going is really, really hard when you're not in a good space. Hang on, keep going, and talk to someone. Share what is going on with you. If you keep it in your head, it will make it much harder. If you share it with someone, and if you don't have someone to share it with, there are lots of options for what to do, I think, out there. Go and look. You will be able to find someone who can help you. Share it. Share what is going on. Talk about it. I don't necessarily agree like a problem shared is a problem halved, but that's the principle that I'm kind of talking about. It's just talk about it. Get it out of your head. I have to get things out of my head. My problems in my head are much worse than my problems in reality. So you can get through it. Talk to someone. And some days you're not going to have it and nothing's going to feel like it's going right. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months, but it will pass. Whatever it is, it will pass. Just hang on, keep going, talk to someone. And life is challenging and difficult, and there's a lot of, I think, objectively terrible things that happen in life, but there's also a lot of beauty. And the beauty often comes through pain and struggle and suffering. And so I think for me, where I'm at in my life now is I can see the purpose and benefit of a lot of my suffering. And it's made me better ultimately. And that's taken a long time, but I would not have been able to do it without sharing and other people's help. It's been other people's help that has got me to that point. It hasn't been me operating on my own willpower and tools and devices. It's been other people helping me, and that's the thing. It's I have to have help if I want to make progress.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to admit, and it's the most valuable thing. And I find suffering is the catalyst for change. It's like
definitely
one of the hardest things. Well, the most common resistance people have is you have a aspect of your life you want to change, but the emotions or resistance that comes with that change are demotivating to the point where you don't do it until it shifts. Have you heard the story about the dog on the nail that talks about that?
No.
There's this dog, every day he sits on the deck and he's like, oh yeah, I love this spot, perfect sunshine, checks out the neighbor's dog, everything's going well. But then there's a nail on his favorite spot. He just complain about it, never change, just keeps sitting on it, and then till a point where the pain gets so immense that he has to move. And I think that's the underlying aspect of change that isn't
totally agree.
Yeah,
totally agree. And I think that pain in my life has been the catalyst for making large changes, but sustaining the change has been about developing discipline. I'm naturally a very undisciplined person.
Me too, yeah.
So developing discipline has been very hard, but discipline has helped me immensely. And I still push it as much as I possibly can. But having routine and discipline has been the other side of the coin. Particularly the driver for the discipline has been that I don't want to go back to the pain. So the pain allowed me to make the change, and then the knowing that the pain is right there if I want it back, if I don't keep these new behaviors and thoughts or whatever up, that's been what's allowed me to become disciplined. It hasn't been the goal of moving forward, it's the fear of going back. I know what I don't want, and so that propels me forward. I've never really been driven by goals in the sense of I have this target I want to achieve. I am very driven by not going back to parts of my life.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because there's a few themes throughout this conversation. As one, I think it's a very important thing that people should bring awareness to, is the concept of absolutes. So each time you describe yourself as a certain individual, you are that individual. It's like a string that ties you. So you're saying, I'm this person. But then the other thing is you talked about iterations and improving consistently. And then you stack that with the avoidance of what you were. So I'm wondering, at what point is it enough?
Never. Never.
That's interesting.
Never. Well, it depends what we mean by enough, right? I would say you're enough now, but for me, I don't want to develop the mindset where I'm not growing and evolving and learning and changing. So you're enough now. Like for me, I know I'm enough now, but I want to be better. And I have that drive to be better, because to me, to not evolve is to be dead. And I would rather die when I actually die than die while I'm still alive, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow.
So
it's deep.
Yeah, that's the thing for me.
There's a lot of people, that zombies walking.
Yeah.
In my judgment. And so like dead while you're still alive. That's quite a powerful point in there.
Or trapped and not able to change. I was unable to change certain things in my life for a very long time, and but I always wanted to, but I could never quite get there. And but eventually I did. It's like I train a lot at the gym now, and now for me it's sort of natural and easy to go to the gym. But that took me a decade.
Yeah.
Right? Like it used to be an immense effort for me to go to the gym once a week. It used to be such a struggle. And then trying to go once a week for like 10 weeks straight, and then trying to do it twice a week. And so, and I would fail and fall off the wagon and binge eat or whatever. The amount of times I've failed is really large.
Yeah.
But if you just get back up and keep going, it's like there's that saying, you only have to win once more than all of your failures.
Yeah.
You just have to get up that one time. And so for me, that's the other thing about change, is that it's fucking hard. It's not easy. It's not, you don't make a commitment in your head to change. Imagine how easy life would be if you're like, yeah, I'm going to change that thing, and it just happens, right? Yeah. It doesn't. It's shit. The process of changing sucks.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. It's worth it.
There's a few pieces in there. There's the currency of guilt. So you think about an agreement that you broke. In order for you to forgive that agreement, either by the perception of others, and they don't really do it, it's a coward's bargain. We all sort of, oh yeah, it's fine, you broke the agreement. It's not fine. Probably, hey, let's have a beer. They don't turn up. That's fucked. So the guilt, if you feel guilty enough, it makes you feel comfortable that the agreement you broke was okay. So you talked about that. So when you had your thousands, failures, millions, whatever, me too. Obviously, I still need one more win for the valley.
You'll get there.
Thank you, bro. But yeah, that shame piece, that guilt. So how did you work through
shame
that?
and guilt is perhaps two of the most corrosive things, I think, to living a life that we want to live. I've had a lot of shame and guilt that I've carried around my whole life, and the way that I had to, or the way that I got taught to deal with it, is to deal with it. It's to take it on. It's to acknowledge it. It's to write down my part in all of it, and then search for ways to make amends. And by making amends, I don't mean saying sorry. Sometimes you have to say sorry for stuff, but it's mending. It's fixing. And a lot of the fixing to get rid of the shame and guilt has been on myself. It's very easy for me to, my first instinct is to get angry and blame other people for things.
Yeah, I'm a talented victim.
Yeah,
at times.
But that doesn't help anyone.
No.
And actually, if there is any kind of, if any situation occurs between us, then there's two of us involved. So of course I have a part in it. And sometimes my part is not as I haven't necessarily done something wrong, but if I react poorly to something, then I've given you a reason to react even more poorly, which has given me a reason to react even more poorly, and suddenly something that I probably shouldn't have reacted to in the first place has now snowballed out of control. So there's always a part in it, but addressing my own shame and guilt and looking at myself and going, why do I feel this way? What have I done? Who do I need to go and speak to? Who do I need to make amends to? How clearing that all out has been essential for me. And a lot of that is going and facing the people and situation and things where those came from and talking about it.
Jeepers.
And that's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. I don't want to bag on religion, but I'm going to bag on religion for a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I don't like the idea of, and again, this is just me, it's just personal opinion, this idea that you can go and be absolved of everything in your past by being plunged into water and coming out. I think is a nice symbolic way of giving human beings the wherewithal to move forward from things that have happened in their life. In saying that, I think it's exceptionally important that you also go back into those parts of your life, people, places, situations, and look them in the eye when you need to, and do whatever you need to move on. Because ultimately, if I can't walk past a person in the street without putting my head down or not wanting to see them because I'm ashamed of something that I've done, then that's something I need to address. I don't want to live my life in fear of what if this person sees me or that person sees me, or I can't be seen here, I can't go there because they'll be there. I don't want to live like that. I want to be able to look life in the eye. And I'm going to fuck up all the time, right? Like, it doesn't mean that I'm not doing anything wrong. It simply means that I've addressed it when I have. And some people are still going to be pissed off at you anyway and not going to like you or whatever, and that's cool. But it's to be who I want to be and live in calm within myself. I have to go and do something about all of that stuff that's making me feel that way. And that's been sort of a life-changing approach to me, right? Because I would never want to do any of that stuff. I don't want to go to my old business partner who I've had a falling out with, which was largely my fault, and go, hey, I'm a fucking dickhead. I'm really sorry about that. But actually, that's the thing that needs to be done to free me from it. And hey, if it frees them from it, whatever they've got going on, then great. Ultimately, it is actually a selfish thing. Like, I'm doing it for me, but it can actually help the other person too. And if you can look at that stuff head on, you can move forward.
I mean, outside of meditation, a key turning point for me is the forgiveness. It's forgiving them and me. Mm-hmm. And you do, you have to make a conscious effort to do the uncomfortable shit to move on, and often don't do it.
Definitely.
And there's also empathy. So I think Closure is a 2-part series where you express how you feel, and hopefully they express how they feel, but they might not be able to or be willing to, and you don't necessarily want to assert your need to move on onto them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I mean, that's also a balance. Mm. So considering we've gone 50 minutes without talking about your business at all.
Great.
What might be, either a business that you think you could add some value to, like a particular challenge or aspiration they have, and then something that you would want them to be cognizant of, to think about that they might be valuable for that problem?
Imagineers, we're very focused on working with the companies that want to transform industries. We're only interested in working with people who truly want to do interesting things. And a lot of companies will ask or say they want to do transformative industry changing things, but actually they just want more of the same that fits within their sort of conservative risk matrix, right? And that's okay too. I'm not poo-pooing it. But for us, we want to work with the people who actually want to change stuff. That's what gets us excited, and going. So the short answer is really anyone doing anything particularly interesting. We work with well-funded startups right through to some of the largest businesses in the country. So it's not really about the size. My team is exceptionally experienced. So we are not the average solution. We have quite an elite group of people. And so sometimes we would work with a startup out of interest because we want to see them do well or whatever. But generally we're interested in people who have the right commercials and funding to approach the problems that they want to solve. You can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't have the money to execute anything, good luck. And unfortunately, because of the way society is structured, is you need good funding to tackle problems well. You don't need good funding to perhaps have breakthrough ideas or to build prototypes of things, but ultimately, if you want to build, grow, and scale and solve problems, you have to have a good funding base. My advice for people who have ideas and who want to build things is learn about finance.
Learn about finance.
Learn about finance. Because if you don't understand how to conceptualize of a business as a financial entity, you will struggle. I had no idea about how to conceptualize of a business as a financial entity when I first started. I just thought of them as like, I'm going to make stuff, build stuff, whatever. And that was a real disadvantage. I'm not saying go and get a finance degree or whatever, but even some basics understanding of things like double entry accounting, how corporate finance works, how capital markets work, that will just help you execute your ideas more effectively. Because ultimately, at some point, you're asking someone for money, and ultimately, they are asking for a return. So if you understand how those things work, you'll be in a much better position. And the easy thing to do is to focus on the idea or the thing you do and not necessarily how to finance it. Now, I'm very big on that because I made all of those mistakes. So for me, paying more of a mind, and so another big thing about, so I work in, digital innovation, creative. Someone has to sign the check for whatever it is that I'm doing, right? And unfortunately, lots of innovation reports to the CFO, which doesn't really make sense. But if you can understand how a CFO thinks about what they put money into within a business, you are 90% of the way there in terms of having a big advantage over other startups or people doing similar things.
Well, it makes sense. Like, there's different frameworks you can use about how to recognize different pieces of the puzzle within an organization, how they approach certain ideas. Like, someone might be good at the later stage of the idea to find everything that's wrong with it. Yep. Some people are fragile at the start, and you bring them in, you crush them. So I think, there's a valuable lesson in the sense of you could have the best idea in the world, but it still needs to be able to meet the market or meet the people that it's explaining.
You've got to be able to execute.
Yeah.
You have to be able to execute. The amount of good ideas that are out there versus the amount of good businesses that are out there are very different. And lots of businesses are started by people who are good at things. So, like, take a hairdresser, for example. Might be an amazing hairdresser who's trained, under some of the best hairdressers ever or whatever. They're just this amazing hairdresser, can do amazing stuff with their craft. But they've got no idea how to run a salon. That is the majority of small businesses, right? Like, people who are really good at things who don't know how to run a business to support doing that thing. And inevitably what ends up happening is that the brilliant hairdresser ends up being a manager running a business and not cutting hair. And that's a real shame. So if you start a company, inevitably you have to wear every hat, you have to do everything. But if you can do it, if you're focused on doing it in such a way where you can make the money work so that you can actually do the thing you're good at, plus have a business, that's really good. Another really interesting thing, which is really silly, is that generally when people are really good at things, they get promoted, not to be given more time, money, space, resources to do the thing they're good at. They generally get promoted to manage people. And so they end up stop doing the thing that they're really good at.
Yeah.
And management has been an exceptionally difficult thing for me to learn and do. It just doesn't come naturally to me. I find it very hard. I have to do it, and I've had to learn it, and I see the value in it, and it's great. But I'm good at the stuff that I do. When I build a company, I have to also build and manage a company. And so for me, having people around me who are really good at that to steer me and help me has been immensely transformative. The way to achieve anything in life is find someone who already has what you want and do what they do. And that's kind of how I've fast-tracked certain aspects of my life. I've just found people who are already have the knowledge or are in a position that I want to be in, and I just find a way to be around that person. And I skip steps, right? It's like the analogy I always use is, if I want to learn basketball, the person I really want to learn from is probably LeBron James. If I can't get him, I go to the next best, go to the next best, go to the next best. It's just an analogy, right? Like, find whoever is the absolute best that you can find and see if you can be around them. And if you can't be around them, we'll find the next best, find the next best, find the next best. I don't want to learn basketball from someone who plays like Division 1 college if I can find someone who plays in the NBA. If I can't find anyone who's better than Division 1 college, then absolutely sign me up with the Division 1 college person. But you get what I mean?
Yeah.
That's been a real key that I've used in my life, because I've done everything the wrong way, right? I didn't go through the academic path properly. I've done everything backwards. And so, that has been one way that I have managed to go forward, is just finding people who have what I want and finding a way to be around them consistently.
And the surprising thing about that, if you're willing to give and have sacrifice, most of them want to help you.
Definitely.
Which is mad. Well, on that note, how do they find you? What if someone thinks you're the LeBron James of innovation? Where do they...
That'd be wrong. It might be a couple levels down.
Division 1.
Yeah, we could debate who's the greatest player of all time, but we won't. Maybe we won't go there this podcast.
Michael Jordan, but that's all right.
See, I take the opposite approach. Go, basketball's a team game. So who is the greatest of all time?
Bill Russell, then.
LeBron James and 4 players, pick any players, would beat Michael Jordan by himself. Or vice versa.
What about Bill Russell, 11 championships, coach as well as team player?
So if we're building the team, yeah. I think Bill Russell has to be on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there we go. We'll meet there.
I think LeBron and Jordan have to be on there too.
Okay.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
I put LeBron on there.
Yeah.
Whether you put Kobe on there or not is the only thing.
I don't think you can if you've got Jordan on there.
You can't what?
I don't think you can put Kobe on there. Like, if we're doing it properly and they're playing positions, Kobe is coming off the bench for Jordan. But Kobe is probably a top 10 player, let's be fair. Yeah. Kobe was the player who got me into basketball.
Oh,
he's one of my favorites. I started playing basketball the moment that I saw, it must have been 2008 or 9. And I think it was against the Sacramento Kings. He was running down the left-hand side, and he got thrown this pass, and he literally jumped and in one motion got into a shot, went up and hit a corner 3. And that moment got me into basketball.
2000.
Anyway, we diverge.
Yeah.
How do people get at me? Well, I have a business called Imagineers. They can just find us, imagineers.co.nz.
Cool.
Or find me on LinkedIn or whatever, and that's where I'll be.
Send a message why he's wrong about basketball. And
I'd
religion.
love to. Yeah, definitely.
I will leave it in the description. But thanks for coming on, mate.
Thanks for having me. Good chat.
It was.
We didn't talk about innovation at all, but we talked about more fun stuff. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, you got to sell the character, mate.